glad to have you, gentlemen and lady. Very good afternoon from Uganda, and good morning to you, those of you in the US. We're glad to have you here on Civic Space TV. And this is the Diaspora, the Uganda Diaspora Show. And my name is Lynn Komcha. It is on our YouTube, it is on our social media platforms. If you follow us in Civic Space TV, you'll definitely find us and these conversations that we've had previously and today. For those of you who are new, we're glad to have you. Henry Sally, it's good to have you. I think we've had Godbert and Shave a while back, a long time ago, but it's good to have you. And of course, the usual Miriam and Francis, it's always a pleasure. And yet again, we sit to discuss interesting developments across the continent, but also particularly in Uganda. And as it is tradition here, I would love to start by asking what made headlines for you this week, or maybe even last week, because I did not see you last week. So there are issues that some things might have happened last week. So it would be nice to hear what is making headlines for you. And I'll begin with Godwin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lynn. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, and we're hoping we could see you.
I should be visible.
Oh, there you are. There you are.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, thanks very much. A great pleasure to meet you all colleagues. As I mentioned earlier, I have been down in the farm in Ntungamo where I do coffee farming. So I'd just going to supervise one of the plantations which we are developing, that where we planted our seedlings in March. So we are basically trying to take care of them because it's the peak of the drought season now. We have to be able to be consistently supervising and watering so that we don't lose the seedlings. And as many of you know, that Uganda is we are a coffee economy. Basically, coffee being one of our biggest foreign exchange earner, but also the crop that contributes most money to households. So we are working with a number of communities and households to be able to expand coffee production in Ntungamo. In terms of the headlines, really, I would say two things: one national, one international. The national one really was the crisis within the Forum for Democratic Change, which is one of the major opposition political parties in the country. And there were allegations that the president of Uganda, President Museveni, had given money to top FDC leaders. That's the party president and the party secretary general. And they were given money to be used by the party in the 2021 elections, and many of the party officials were uncomfortable because they don't know the source of the money, but also they think that the money was being provided to purchase the political party, because the president and the NRM, they have a practice of trying to co-opt all the other political parties. They have done it with the UPC, they have done it with the DP, and therefore the FDC leaders believe that this is the same scheme that President Museveni is doing. So it was really a big crisis, seeing a party that has been in existence since around 2003 being shaken to the core in terms of the leadership crisis, and it's something that we are watching because how the crisis ends has implications on whatever democratic progress that we make as a country. So I think at the national level, that's probably like the big story. The rest of the stories are the usual stories of corruption, of mismanagement, which agency has mismanaged which funds. But I think that the FDC story has been the big one. I think that the globally and regionally, there are two important stories that are connected: the Russia-Africa summit. And the coup in Niger. I think the Russia-Africa summit, again, for me, it represents the failure of African leaders to be able to carve out a niche for the continent. that all these other global leaders, Russia, China, US, Japan, EU, France, that each one of them can summon a multitude of African leaders, and they travel there in a summit where probably the agenda is sent by the summit convener. We have not seen at any time when Africans have been able to summon these leaders and come to Africa. So these African presidents just go to these summits and then they start flexing muscles on issues of trade and issues of foreign policy, but actually they are in someone's on someone's table. So I really have issues with these summits, the way they are organized, the way the African leaders are summoned. Secondly, for Russia, it's very, very important because Russia is in the midst of a war with Ukraine. Both the Russians and the West, that's the United States and its NATO allies, have been quoting African countries to be on their side. And I think for Putin, this is like a do or die matter, because with its global isolation, Putin really sees Africa as like its hunting ground for allies, and therefore he can be able to dangle around a number of initiatives. The trade initiatives, I don't really believe that those are really solid. But I think what is solid from the Russian side are the arms trade, and probably because Russia has been also one of the major proponents of development of nuclear power stations within the African region. I think right now they have about a couple of half a dozen countries where they are trying to develop nuclear power stations, including Uganda. Now, connected to that is the coup in Niger, which has again brought forward the fact that the African Union as a grouping of African nations is such an incompetent and almost, I would say, useless organization, because it has no capacity to be able to create discipline among African rulers. So you can see almost when you look at Niger, you look at Mali, you look at Central African Republic, you look at Chad, the West and the East are almost creating a new Cold War where the battleground is Africa. And these African presidents from different angles, they all seem to be almost excited that, oh, this is our fight, because we are fighting the West, we are allying with Russia, then there are those allying with the Americans. You really see a continent that is in total disarray, almost the way we were at the end of the 1980s. So that's really, for me, the Russia-Africa summit and the coups that are happening on the continent, and the fact that the African presidents, the African Union, does not have a coherent and smart response to what's happening, and you have all these African leaders now beginning even to welcome and sign agreements with with Wagner mercenary group. That is the depth of the crisis that the continent is facing, and that crisis is a crisis of lack of leadership at presidential level. I think for now, let me pause it there, Lynn, and pass it on to the other colleagues.
Absolutely, thank you, Godber. I'll come to you, Francis Kamhanda. Francis, what is making headlines this week for you? What made headlines for this week, and perhaps the previous?
Well, thank you, Lynn, and other fellow panelists. I'm glad once again to be on this panel and then discuss and exchange views. To me, what made headlines, I will not differ from other members, is one, the FDC wrangle hit me hard. As a member of the opposition, I do expect that there could be internal conflicts, but I did not think that they would go to that extent of where FDC reached. And that has an implication for all of us who are agitating for fundamental change in the country. And my prayer is that there should be a time when really the FDC leadership can sit and resolve this before it leaves the party in an awkward position, but definitely it having also an effect on other political parties, or I would say on the opposition in general, and that speaks much to we who are in opposition to begin looking at ourselves and ensure that we learn how to resolve internal issues without necessarily going out in public, and otherwise we would lose trust of the public. Also, at the same time, to build trust within our political organizations. Then internationally, also, of course, this has been going on, where our African leaders keep going outside whenever they see a new issue coming up, and then most especially, then they think that's what is going to deliver Africa from all the challenges that they have, including the visit when our leaders came to the US, now to Russia, now I think China will call them, now maybe another small country somewhere will also call them, and they go on running. But to me, the take that I have is that in most cases, like from a democratic perspective, you find that our leaders, they go and align themselves with someone or a leader, like for this case Russia and China, that does not respect human rights at all. And then that has an implication that what are they learning in terms of democracy, but also in terms of the people trusting you as a leader and the leader delivering. And when they go there, what they are just talking, to me it does not make sense. Even if you talk of coffee, but what are you doing in Uganda to help the local farmer? And I have always used an example of my grandfather or my father, to ensure that he produces coffee, and then like the professor now who is involved in coffee, and at least is much more well informed than my father or my grandfather, then can say this is how we can add value. And has he or the farmers, have they been given, empowered by government to ensure that they add value on their own coffee, apart from going to tell somebody there to come and exploit us? So to me that is a concern. And then too, if we say that Uganda depends on agriculture, which is its backbone, how have you solved the land crisis where people are evicting people from land and they don't have any livelihood? What kind of society are you trying to build? For me, I see the global trend is there is again a scramble for and partition of Africa, but this time it may be much more dangerous than how it was during the pre-colonial and I mean during the pre-colonial and colonial time. So it is important that we look into these matters with keen interest, rather than being excited that maybe a president has made remarks, because this is not, like, for example, what did we benefit from when there was a trade expo, and then we spent a lot of money, but at the end of the day we don't see the tangible benefits that go to the local people. And I have always said, Lynn, that for me, I believe in microeconomics. Don't tell me something that is national. That is money that can be in the hands of 2 or 3 people or 10 people. I believe in telling me the implication at family level, not the implication at national level. for now, that's what I can say. Of course, like the coups in West Africa, but also at some point, you remember when the East African bloc had agreed they would have a deal with the EU, and then Kenya jumped out to go and sign it. Well, it is choosing the slow pace of other East African countries. So all these you see are forces that even when you want to come together as a bloc, of course, as a bloc, this signing papers and saying we are in the East African community, where the engine, like the economy, is not again fused together to be. America is speaking big because of the size of the economy. So if East Africa again, when we begin again moving as isolated countries, then the East African community is just a club that where people go and talk for leisure than looking at the interest of the bloc and what we may achieve in general. Thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Absolutely, Francis, thank you. And when you look at the coups in the West Africa, I mean, it's not the first time, it's not the second time, and it's almost all these nations in the West African region. And you're wondering where all this is headed, but I think it's a season of its own, and we're yet to see how that goes. Henry Sully, I come to you. Could you quickly tell us what made headlines for you?
All right, I was hoping for gender balance in this conversation because there's too many who have spoken already. But thank you so much again, Lynn, for inviting us to this very important discussion. A few things that I consider important. On the world scale, of course, many people are talking about the Africa-Russia summit. That was the second of its kind. The first one being held in 2019. I think that, in my opinion, we need to give Putin credit because he hasn't hosted these Africa summits by himself. Every time he hosts, the first one, he hosted it with another African leader of Egypt, I think Fatah el-Assis. The second one, he held it in collaboration with the president of Comoros. So you see that he's trying to, even though it's Africa, Russia, he is trying to ensure that he includes the leadership of the organization of these summits with African leaders. I think the significant changes between the 2019 one and the 2023 one is that in 2019, there were 43 heads of states that attended the Africa-Russia summit. When you compare that to only 17 heads of state this year, you need to ask whether the trend is it going down or is it going up? Of course, there were 42 representatives this year, but most of the other leaders were either prime ministers or ministers of foreign affairs or permanent secretaries who attended the summit in St. Petersburg. Now, we also have to recognize that he has hosted this during a war with Ukraine, which is seemingly unsuccessful, but we cannot necessarily say that he has failed because he is one man versus the world, pretty much. Or the European Union is against this war. The US is against this war. Many other people, including a few African countries who voted against it during the UN General Assembly. So, first of all, what's the significance of this summit? Is it successful so far? And what are the implications of the members that attend this summit? Who are the common heads of states that continue to come back year after year? Now, when I say year after year, I can't really substantiate that because there have only been two summits, 2019 and 2023. We also recognize that the second summit was supposed to happen in Ethiopia, but for some reason it was changed to St. Petersburg, perhaps because Russia is engaged in the Ukrainian war right now. We also know that one of his surrogate, that fights his wars or conducts most of his coup d'etats attended the 2023 summit. So I think that is something that we need to engage in, discuss more, try to unpack what transpired. Economically, what does it mean for Africa? What does it mean for Russia? And what does it mean for the world altogether? We know that as far as the new colonialism or the new partition of Africa, right now the leading partitioner is China. If we look closely, because China is all over Africa right now, you could say that, joking that I tell people that the only person who skipped the Africa-Russia summit was China, because China is seemingly becoming a member of the African community, based on how much investments they are making here within African countries, and how the visibility of Chinese people in Africa. I just came back from Uganda, but when I was heading to Kampala, almost 40% of the people on the plane were Chinese. And when I was coming back, it was a similar experience. You could see that there's a significant number of Chinese coming from Uganda. There's a significant number of Chinese going to Uganda. So you have to question what's going on. Are they actually investors? And how are they going to impact our societies in the next decade, in the next 2 decades, or the next 3 decades? I think another very important news bite or news headlines that are going on, the increasing number of coup d'etats, especially in Africa. But we have to remember that these coup d'etats, it's not a new phenomenon within the political landscape of the world, pretty much. We should remember that in 2021, January 6, 2021, there was an attempted coup d'etat in the United States, the biggest democracy in the world. So for us to think that coup d'etats are going to decrease, especially in the African context, we have to reevaluate the way we see the world, the way we think about coup d'etats. In the last decade alone, there has been about over 50 coup d'etats in Africa alone, 53 to be precise, including the most recent on August 1st. I think an attempted coup d'etat in Sierra Leone. So these are phenomena that are not going to end tomorrow, even when we are pretty much, we have entered into the era of artificial intelligence or improved technologies. Of course, we need to understand that coup d'etats are not going to end anytime soon. They always happen. They continue to happen. In the last decade alone, I think there was about 6 coup d'etats in Europe, or attempted coup d'etats. So the world has always thrived on coup d'etats, because people by nature have conflicting views, and we are never cooperative with each other. We always disgruntled about something, or one thing or another. And this brings me to what is happening in the politics in Uganda, what is happening in FDC, pretty much what is happening in UPC, DP, being co-opted to the majority NRM. Even though most of us do not want to accept that NRM right now is very strong, but NRM is the richest party right now because of what is going on. Most of the people in government are from NRM. Most of the corruption that is happening within Uganda is orchestrated by members of the NRM, and that's why even Miss Betty Kamya is failing. She is failing to pin down any people in terms of what is happening regarding corruption. That's why Mr. Museveni was comfortable telling her that, these people, you have to be careful about these people, because they invest money in Uganda. And you have to be careful on how you handle these people, because you don't want them to take money outside of the country. You want them to keep it here. So it's encouraged. First of all, corruption is encouraged uh, uh, by the top dog of the person at the head, and that's why it's going to be very hard for us to fight it. It's going to be very easy for Mr. Museveni to continue fighting any significant opposition members, opposition parties in Uganda. I think we are starting to see the truth surrounding some of the words that Major General Mugisha Muntu used to say, that patience will exonerate him. And I think patience is starting to exonerate him because of what he said before he left the FDC and created the ANT. To what extent is ANT going to thrive during this crisis? I think that is something that is yet to be seen. Something that we need to watch closely and see how these happenings, whatever these events that are happening within the different political parties, Mao being having a homecoming and being pretty much praised by General Salim Saleh during his homecoming, having so many people from the NRM praise what he has done so far. What does that mean for DP? What does that mean for the opposition? Yesterday, I saw a picture with Honorable Mao. I think Engineer Patrick Amliat and Obute's son, what's his name? The UPC president, having a lunch with I think the PSS for NRM. And that's a picture that is being discussed a lot. Of course, we don't know what the conversation was about, but there are speculations that it could have been conversations regarding how these other parties can be co-opted within NRM while continuing to wear the opposition face. So do we still have the opposition in Uganda? That's a question that we need to interrogate and see who are the opposition, how do they really operate within the landscape, the political landscape of Uganda? Should we expect any coup d'etats in Uganda? I think not. After all these years, I think Mr. Museveni has done an incredible job fending off any sort of coup d'etats. He has retired all possible generals that could have engaged in any sorts of coup d'etats. He has threatened those who are influential and powerful using all other means. Remember the attempted assassination of General Katumba Wamala. I don't think any other general within the such ranks can even think about a coup d'etat right now. I don't think there's anyone who is as organized as the SFC is right now. We have to remember that these guys have actually gone abroad, studied abroad. They're very well equipped, and they're being protected by the U.S. interests in Uganda. And I think that is one thing that is keeping Mr. Museveni in power, because the people who would have helped, because all these coup d'etats that happen, they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because they have external interests influencing them and to an extent helping to execute some of these successful coup d'etats. We know that what happened in Niger, for example, there are speculations that there are three interests. There's the French interest, the US interest, and the Russian interest. And whoever is going to have more clout in establishing influence on the new government will govern or will keep the stability of that coup. So that coup is going to be determined by who has the most interest, which external influencers have the most significant interests, and to what extent can they influence that government to stabilize. I think those are some of the the issues, the headlines that are happening, that are things that I'm thinking about right now. I'm excited to hear what others have in mind and how we can together evaluate the political situation, both in Uganda but also in Africa and the world at large.
Fantastic. Thank you, Henry. Miriam, it was very strategic for me to end with you on this particular one because I know you have even more interesting details. So what made headlines for you? Let's get into it.
Yeah, Henry was accusing you of misbalancing the agenda, so take note of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice to hear from the other panelists, but let me start from where Henry ended. Actually, Henry, for your information, the guy who led the coup in Niger is not a general, and he was also US trained. And like you said SFC can't do nothing because US has interest and all that, protection and all that. I mean, it was the same case in Niger, and that's what actually part of what led to the conflict that led to the coup. So those interests, the so-called foreign interests, have a habit of conflicting with each other and leading to the collapse of the regime. So if I were M7, I would watch my back. And the problem is not the generals, actually, it's the bodyguards, it's the smaller guys around you who usually do the who usually kick you out. But that aside, I think that the FDC wrangles to me was a sad moment. Not only a sad moment, but awakening moment, and another indicator of failure on NRM regime on how it has failed to build democracy and democratic institutions in Uganda. You can't be a leader for the last 40 years in a country and you are claiming to be building democratic institutions, and you end up buying opposition parties. I mean, you can't have a democracy without competition. And then you are buying them off, not just with your pocket money or the money you sold from your cattle, but taxpayers' money. You're bribing the opposition groups with the taxpayers' money, which is a big case of corruption, a big case of abuse of office, but an abuse of democratic institutions that a person of a president is supposed to uphold in order to facilitate democratic processes in his country. So it's an embarrassment on the side of FDC and a very sad FDC leadership, and a very sad affair for Ugandans because we had too much hope in that party as the party that has been the leader of opposition for a long time and has led a lot of growth as far as political change is concerned. It has championed a lot of causes, has pushed for a lot of laws and some incidences which have put a big check on the dictatorship. I mean, they've been the right check and balance organ that we've had, the best that we have had for the longest time. NUP is just a newcomer, and we are yet to see how they perform. But FDC has hired that flag for a long time and very well until they betrayed us. So the betray is not only for their party members, but for all of us as Ugandans. And they should take note of that. But on the other hand, I was happy to see the wrangle come out, because for the last 4 years, FDC was like a sleeping giant. You don't see them doing nothing. You don't see them anywhere. So everybody was wondering what's going on. Maybe now that truth has come out, maybe they will be able to reorganize and put themselves in check and get back on the road. And maybe by 2025, 2026, when we are organizing for the next elections, maybe we would see them back in shape and ready to challenge the status quo. On the side of the coups in Africa, the Russian African summit. First of all, the coups. There's so many coups, especially in West Africa. But the other side, there is a lot of political conflict also on the East African and other African sides. We have a case in Sudan. The conflict is ongoing ever since the ousting of Bashir. There has never been peace there. South Sudan has never stabilized. We have DRC conflicts going on there. In Uganda, we also have a DF in Uganda, and it's known that it's foreign funded so far. So seeing the conflict in West Africa and how it's being largely influenced by foreign forces. The USA has most of its military bases in West Africa, based in Niger. France has dominated all the conflicts in West Africa, almost all of them, because of their interests, because of their imperial stronghold on those countries, and has successfully impoverished all of them, if not, except for a few cases like the countries which were initially colonized by the France are still under their stronghold, and they are all largely impoverished. Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world today, and yet they have uranium, one of the most richest mineral in the world. And you wonder, why are they poor? That's a small country, smaller population. It has natural resources. Uranium deposits and the land and the strategic positioning would be enough to enrich that country if it would be put to the benefit of the people of Niger. But looking at it right now, it's one of the poorest countries in the world, yet it's the richest. Then you look at the forces fighting for grabs in the Niger, the France, the Russians, the French, the Russians, and the USA. And you wonder, what are they investing in that country? Are they just milking it and going away? Are they like parasites, like they are sucking life out of it? And when it collapses, they just pack the last plane and leave that country. What have they done for that country ever since the inception of that country? USA claims they have the largest military interest in that country. But what have they done for the people of Niger? Have they built schools? Have they built hospitals? Are they building industries? Suppose that uranium was processed in Niger and there is an industry which is processing uranium, maybe up to a certain level where they can employ a million of young Nigerians, and that money stays in that country. How far would it have taken that country as far as economic development is concerned, or skilling the country, or education? Except what we see are the importation of military, the drones. The US has all the bombs located in the Niger. France wants the minerals, and I'm sure they also bring in their military forces to protect their interests. They even have a clause with the Niger that if their interests are ever threatened, they have a right to intervene militarily to protect their so-called interests. But that clause is not reciprocated. Like, for instance, Niger cannot go to France to invade and protect their interests. But what would their interests be in France? So if these are two countries which have like international relations, the relation is like that of a parasite and the exploited. So we are still at that level economically. We are still like at the pre-independence level, where the Western countries, the Western imperialists, are only interested in Africa for its resources, and they are ready to trample on everybody in order to get out what they want and leave that country. It's for the same reasons that they killed the post-independence African leaders like Sankara, like Lumumba, and Osted Nkrumah. And we still see the same thing in the 21st century. And that brings me to our next question. Today, you see ECOWAS and AU scrambling to protect the so-called sovereignty of the Niger and the democracy, and they are trying to tell the coup leaders to step back and reinstate the ousted president. Of course, it's questionable how that president was also elected, but we are not going into that. But why are you coming at that late stage? I mean, making statements and declarations without building the internal systems that would uphold the democratic processes won't save anything. It's like you're trying to prevent an accident after it has already happened. So if AU wants to make an impact and stop the coups in Africa, it has to go deep into African states and build the democratic processes, ensure there are free and fair elections, ensure that their institutions protect the civil rights and the human rights of the people, ensure that the leaders, the leadership, the transparency, there is freedom of association, there is a freedom political debate, and most importantly, there is economic development. You won't be surprised to find that even these military coup leaders who are claiming nationalism and all that, deep inside, if you scratch on the surface, you might find that they are fighting for a few crumbs of the dollars that these foreign interests throw around. And before the coup happened, there were the cause of conflict, the major cause of conflict was rumored that the military officials in Niger were claiming they were not well facilitated by the current president, which of course alludes to money and resources. But that aside my question is, where are the African elites when all this chaos is happening? That includes Uganda. Where are the elites? Godba, where are you guys? When FDC is being bought and sold left and right, when Museveni is closing the UN human rights offices in Kampala, when the human rights abuses are going on in NUP and people are being kidnapped and nobody's raising a voice, where are the elites? Where are the scholars in Makerere? Where is civil society? Where are the religious leaders? We are the business people in the campaign. Otherwise, if we don't stop these things from happening today, that's how we end up with coups. That's how we end up relying on mercenaries, killers like Wagner, who is now like the president of West Africa. He's moving around toting his guns. He's claiming to protect everybody. That's the largest, the biggest insult on Africa ever since colonialism. Those mercenaries. How can we rely on foreigners to protect our own leaders in 21st century? We have the youngest population in the world. We have a skilled population. We are enlightened. Where is our nationalism when we are hiring mercenaries to protect our own people? Who will protect? A foreigner will come. If you hired him to kill, he's going to kill the children, the women, and loot and go home. He has no interest in that country whatsoever. So as Pan-Africanists, where is our nationalism? Where is our African heart really in this? We are here cheering, oh, we need Russia, but where are we, the Africans? I would be more happier if the Niger coup or the Central African Republic leader was, for instance, maybe hiring UPDF to protect him instead of a Russian mercenary at that. Thank you, Lynn. Let me stop here for now.
Right, thank you, Miriam. And just like that, we are all ushered into actually what the day's topic is all about. But I want to begin from a point that you made, and actually 2 points. You talk about buying a political party with taxpayers' money. The question is, do we have evidence, or are we just alluding to the fact that, well, somebody did mention that the party was being sold, was being bought left, right, and center. The elites, the likes of God, but himself.
Hello, Lynn.
to that?
I could actually pick that lane.
Yes.
And partly because I'm also about to jump into the vehicle, so I may have the network unstable.
Okay.
But I just wanted to touch on a couple of points, some of them raised by Henry.
Mm-hmm.
One is that actually the point that Miriam is raising about the Museveni and his group buying political parties, yeah, one can ask about the evidence, but it's connected to the point that was mentioned by Henry that NRM is a rich political party. And I think it's that perception that really we need to be able to confront and basically be able to describe NRM for what it is. And I call NRM a corruption enterprise. This is a group of people who basically have appropriated the state and state resources. They use the consolidated fund to manage their party. They use every resource of the state to be able to build the patronage network. So NRM, if we thought that it exists, one should understand that it exists as a corruption enterprise because of the unlimited access it has to public resources and the level of financial indiscipline that it exercises. And therefore, sometimes some of us, we blame these political position leaders and basically saying, oh, they are not serious or they have been bought. I keep on telling colleagues and say, if you were a Ugandan actively engaged in opposition politics and you consider the amount of state resources in terms of money, in terms of coercion, in terms of intelligence, these political party leaders must be given credit that they can even be there and be playing the role they are playing. So I think that's something that we need to appreciate because many of us who are not engaged in active political position, we cannot appreciate the kinds of the kind of resources that are deployed to demobilize you as an opposition politician. And secondly, I think we need to understand that one of the main tools for a dictatorship like the Museveni dictatorship to survive and thrive is that it invests in demobilizing institutions of citizenship. What do I mean? Every dictatorship around the world, what they do is that they make sure that the citizens are not organized, because citizens' power is expressed through organized formations. So they could be cultural institutions. Those who are active in politics, they are organized in political formations. Those who are professionals, and I think Miriam talked about the academics and others, these are organized in professional bodies like the Law Society, the Association of Engineers, the Medical Association, and all the others. The workers are organized in trade union associations. In Uganda, we are deeply organized around in religious formations. And you can go on and on and on. Now, when you have a sophisticated dictatorship like the one that we have, which spends time and demobilizes all these groups, you co-opt religious leaders, you give them goodies, you buy them cars, you give them envelopes, you put cultural leaders on payroll, you support people who are aligned to your regime to be able to take over professional bodies. That's basically, you are talking about demobilized citizenship, and it is that demobilized citizenship that enables a dictatorship to thrive and survive. So that I really want us to understand that if we are going to deal with the situation in Uganda, we have to think of how do we build citizens formations. By the way, we can also talk about the diaspora. For many of us who have watched the Uganda North American Association, we knew this was one of the most powerful diaspora associations that existed. And I follow the diaspora association in Kenya. These two are completely different. And we know you can trace the time when UNA almost, I think now it is now split into two because you have UNA and UNA causes. And this is not by accident. Dictatorships cannot allow a very influential group like UNA to survive as an entity that is coherent, because the kind of power you can exercise is immense. So I really wanted to make sure that I can put that point across. Secondly, I think I don't know whether it's Henry who talked about Putin convening a Russia-Africa summit with an Egyptian president and the other president. I think that one of my quarrels with us as Africans is that we really celebrate marginal achievements, because what difference does it make if Joe Biden partnered with Museveni to organize a US-Africa summit? My point is that these summits, wherever they are, US, Japan, China, Russia, France, wherever, they are all mechanisms for those countries to extend their spheres of influence. Because you see, if you are a president of Uganda and you go,
I think your network is having a moment.
Yeah, he needs to walk back to where he was.
China, it's okay. You can feel good. They must be able to come back home and organize our citizens and build competencies in terms of citizenship, in terms of production, in terms of economic organizing, for them to prepare themselves to engage with the rest of the world. You can't leave countries that are scattered, whether it's Central African Republic, it's DRC, it's Uganda, you can't just be scattered as countries and then you just jump in a jet and land in Washington DC or St. Petersburg or Beijing, and then you say, I have come here to negotiate with these countries. I think it's diplomatically, it gives you some good photo moments, but without this strength at home, there isn't much that you can be able to do, and that is where I think we have a problem. Let me end on this point. It's either Henry of Francis who talked about the coups, that there was on January 6th there was a coup in the US, or there are coups all over the region. Man, you have to understand that these countries, the US, the Europe, Russia, China, now Saudi Arabia, Iran, they have made Africa the battleground. I think that needs to be understood. The level of the influence, and because some of the African leaders say they are allying with Russia to fight off the vestiges of colonialism. Man, if you are allying with Russia and China and Iran, I don't know how those spheres of influence, I don't know how different they are compared to the other countries. So these coups, you need to go to the various African Union instruments, a number of conventions that have been adopted by these countries, where they have said coups are not acceptable as a form of change of government. You have the Africa Security Council, but the fact that all these rulers that are in place, the Musevenis, the Obiang Nguemas, the Paul Bias, all these are guys who have been in power for 30, 40 years. They have no clout to be able to tell these young officers who are taking over to say you can't. So in other words, the distortions within our governance system created by these life presidents across the continent is basically feeding into a situation where the rest of the world is coming to take over Africa, and people are standing, these rulers are standing on different sides of the spectrum and they are cheering as if, no, Africa right now is, I think everybody looks at it as a carcass of where they can go and grab each other, and the African rulers are the enablers of this competition for this carcass. So let me pause there, Lillian. I'll be in the vehicle traveling, so in case I lose network, but if I have stable network, I'll still be on the show.
We
Absolutely.
don't want
Thank
you
you.
to lose
end on a
network
very
because
you end on a very interesting note, because many analysts are contending that Africa, the African continent, of course, being a rich resource area, has a growing population and is strategically located, is a stage where many major powers are vying for influence. And we know it's not just China and the US, but now we see Russia coming on board. But and this is where he ends. Africa has become a carcass, and everyone wants to have a piece because they're hungry for the resource that we have here. Now, when I come to Francis, because everything leads us back to this Russia-Africa summit, even the coups, because we see the role the Wagner Group is playing in West Africa, in the South Africa. There was a time it was there, and then it moved, and so here we are back again at the Russia-Africa summit. And we know that African leaders went to Russia with some, they had a lot on the agenda, but two of the issues that were really high on agenda, that is a grain deal and a clear path to end Ukraine. And none of that, end the Ukraine-Russia war. And none of that was agreed to. And some analysts are actually saying that Russia is only looking for allies. Do you agree, Francis?
Oh, thank you, Lynn. As I earlier on stated during my opening remark, because I do not believe that as Africa we can't feed ourselves, we depend on the mercy of either US or Russia. And indeed, if the African leaders, one of the most important things was to go and sign the grain deal, then they did not know that Russia is busy looking for allies, for a sympathy from Africans to justify whatever it's doing in Ukraine and world over, in as far as these wars are concerned. But what I do say as an individual is that if you also look at the presidents who have gone there, or leaders, are leaders that in one way or another have dictatorial tendencies, that they also don't look at what their citizens will benefit from such a deals, but for them as individuals, what they will benefit from that. And yet, at this moment, would be looking at how do we guarantee peace and tranquility? How do we build our government so that there is mutual benefit? But instead, you are going there that, for example, right now, during this war, if we agree, if Russia now doesn't have resources to further finance its war with Ukraine, and then it is seeing Africa as a hub, then in one way or another, we are part and parcel for whatever atrocities and suffering that Russia may be causing in Ukraine. And this also speaks to the fact that then from there, much as these leaders find it as an opportunity to entrench themselves, then in one way or another, they will get guns, like as how we have also agreed with the Wagner Group, that you are coming to also entrench a dictator and to continue killing people in our African continent. To me, while it may be a good thing for these summits, if they had a positive intention, or if we're at the same level, that if African leaders are going to meet a Russian president, are they meeting as equals, or they are just meeting as underdogs? So for me, that's where the question is. And then it brings us to what Godba was saying. There is lack of leadership in Africa. And this leadership is just as a result of having dictatorial leaders, corruption, embezzlement, nepotism, name them, that it keeps coming over and over. So we need to know, indeed, to study whether it is the West, whether it is the East or whatever. What are their interests in our countries? And for us, what should be our interest? As I went back, our interest would be much, Godba talked about it, would be much catered for if we are going as blocks. Like, for example, if we are going as ECOWAS, if we are going as East African Community, if we are going as African Union. But even when we are going as East African Community, when we are going as ECOWAS, if we are going as African Union, if we don't have trust amongst ourselves, we still have people who are greedy for both power, and then they can easily be corrupted, because that is the West and the East and whatever. They have known that there is lack of integrity when it comes to our leaders, and therefore they can easily be corrupted in one way or another. Miriam talked about it. Why should a country like Niger, that almost the nuclear power or energy in France, 15% of it depends on the minerals from Niger. But then you look at how is Niger currently. So how come that with all these resources, like Mariam, I mean Lynn, you have been hearing of the amount of money that we lose in billions when you follow COSASE and other committees interrogating all these deals. The amount of money that we lose, could we not be having good roads and good hospitals in Uganda? Then what is it that Museveni is convincing me that is going to negotiate from Russia, that is going to negotiate from Iran and these other countries, that I should believe as a common person that it is going to be of beneficial to the Ugandan and not him and his clique? When Henry was talking about coups that Museveni has entrenched himself, I do agree, Museveni has entrenched himself. But time is going to come when people cannot take it in anymore. If you have been seeing how people stand even to before the police, before the army, and before even government officials. The most recent one I saw, they were filming, was it a general in the army or somebody in the army, and there was a court feud, something like that. But you see that people are now are saying enough is enough, and that is very dangerous to our country. And most of the places where coups have taken place, they have not been carried out by generals. No, these are majors, these are lieutenants, and so on and so forth. Well, yes, I agree that Museveni has neutralized most of his army officers and so on. But what we must agree, to me, as the way forward, we can't stop organizing ourselves. We shall keep building as Museveni dismantles, but time is in our favor. Time is in our favor. Yes, Godba talked about UNA. Yeah, of course, those what dictatorships do. Yes, the NRM came into UNA, and for sure it divided it apart. It divided it apart. But that does not stop us from continuously rebuilding and reorganizing and then restructuring ourselves in the most formidable way as much as we can. And to me, I appeal to all like-minded people that we shall keep identifying the forces that divide us, and then we see how we mitigate them, and we still move forward. But I would still say that it for the members of the opposition, and the Godba talked about something important, like for us in ANT, that's what we have been doing. Like, how do we go back to the local, to the grassroots, and begin carrying out civic education, begin reaching out to the population to understand their role, because that is another way how Museveni has killed the participation in politics, that the local people see him, even when a road has been constructed, they say Museveni has helped us by constructing for us a road, and yet they don't know that they are also they have contributed to this road, because it is not his money but taxpayers' money. And if in any case, by the time he constructs a road that will take maybe 500 millions, he had eaten over triple the cost of that road. So all these, we ensure that the local people know, and then we build, beginning to bring back all these structures and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the day, like as I have said, time is on our side, and time will come to testify. Museveni has to go. Museveni will go, but I know the damage that he has caused to the country. Another person who will be coming, or we as upcoming leaders, we must ensure that it is an uphill task to bring back everything to normal. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Francis. And you actually tell us, there's something I came across, and we realized that over the years since COVID happened, the president has been on, I don't know, intentionally traversing many countries across the world, trying to create some sort of, or renewing some sort of international relations with Uganda. We saw him go to South Africa. We saw him go to some country in Europe that I forget. We saw him go to now Russia. There was a US summit. There was a China Africa summit. He's been to Dubai, and even in as much as we look at it in a sense of him being, of course, in power, I think he's also trying to save the country, because we're not doing well per se in terms of our economy. So clearly, I'm thinking he's making inroads in different other countries for us not to depend heavily on the US. And this looks like we are equally under petition, like Africa in general. So, Francis, what you say is that we really, we will see that day come. And I don't know if Miriam and Henry agree to it. But let me hear from Henry right now. Henry, you were actually, when you spoke, you said, we are yet to see the impact of the Russia-Africa summit. What does it mean for Africa in particular, and what does it mean for Uganda as well? But if you're looking at food security, first of all, and the Wagner issues, what comes to your mind? Are we seeing Russia taking control because it is giving us arms, equipment is what they were talking about? And then we have the Wagner issue. And then we have the issue of food security that the African leaders presented before Putin and his colleagues. But again, don't forget, factor in the issue that he was also selling our coffee out there, which is most important.
Well, thank you so much again for these questions. First, I need to respond to my colleagues, both Godbar and Francis, who is off at the moment. In regard to my statement earlier that NRM is contextually right now the richest political party in Uganda, I did put a caveat to its wealth. And the caveat is that NRM's wealth is rooted in its capacity to engage in corruption, massive corruption within the country. Obviously knowing very well that the appointing authority decides who governs which association or which agency within Uganda's economic landscape. So that's where its wealth or richness comes in. And of course, Mr. Museveni is not doing anything wrong in terms of entrenching himself in power. Anyone who wants to stay longer in power does exactly what Mr. Museveni does. You divide, you ensure that you demobilize all the organized groups. You ensure that you create divisions within consolidated opposition groups, because the more opposition you have, the longer you have, the longer you may have to stay in power. That's the reason why UNA is divided. That's why DP is divided. That's why FDC right now is divided. It's the reason why we have General Mugisha Muntu creating his own entity, even though it hasn't really caught up in terms of popularity from the ground up. And I think to Mr. Kamhanda's submission that we have to go back to the grassroots. These conversations, first of all, are not happening. The civic spaces that we have created these spaces, but they are largely for elites. The reason why NUP is succeeding right now is because when they started, they branded themselves as the ghetto group. The people who are coming from the ghetto, the people who are for the common people. And that's why they were able to catch up so easily because they ceased even engaging in these conversations in a foreign language, which is mostly English, right? They talked a lot. Their slogans were mostly localized, either in Uganda or other dialects within Uganda. So they localized themselves, and that's how they were able to carry that storm that we see in Parliament right now, even though they have no significant impact in terms of policy changes or even political transformations along Uganda's political landscape. So if we are going to be able to succeed in going to the grassroots, we have to ensure that we are not just focusing on the elites. These civic spaces have to go down to the ground. We have to localize them. We have to have these conversations translated in local languages. You see everywhere that Mr. Bobby Wine goes, you have seen a person in either Uganda or in some of these already countries or Europe, translate every conversation that he says, either in Uganda or Lusoga or Nyankore. And that's because they want to stabilize, they want to stay on the grounds. They're trying to stay at the grassroots. They're trying to communicate to the person who is looking for bread and butter on a daily basis. Someone who is looking for chikomando to survive. Those are the people they are communicating to. I think if we are going to be able to dislodge this dictatorship, and that's what we need to do. Unfortunately, there are speculations that the NUP is really a project of Mr. Museveni himself, and that's why he's not very scared about it, even though popularity-wise, it seems to be the most popular party right now, opposition party right now. He's not even, we haven't seen significant focus on him in terms of disorganizing or dislodging the NUP. In terms of his travels and rebranding himself, we have seen that in most of the countries he has gone to, when he went to the US summit, who did he go to? Who did he go with? He went with his daughter, right? We know that when he went to Russia, he went with his son. We know that when he went to China, he went with his wife, and like all the people that he's moving with, even with this rebranding, he's not just walking by himself. He's walking with someone very close to him, a family member. So he's telling them that, I'm here, but even without me around, this one will take care of you. This one will take care of your interests, right? And the people that he's showing to the world, they're all family friends. Mr. Tumushabe Godba talked earlier on about some of the institutes that we can use to organize ourselves, to fight back and dislodge this dictatorship. He mentioned cultural institutions, professional associations, trade unions, all of which have been entrenched by this organization by Mr. Museveni. In terms of cultural institutions, there is a lot that has been going on in terms of first of all, remember in 2016 when one of the fiercest cultural institution that was fighting back was the Omumbele institution. And when they tried to fight back, we all looked at them in isolation. we never added to their voices to empower them to say that, you know what, you have a right to say what you are saying, and the government should listen to you. When Mr. Museveni decided to use force to arrest the Omumbele, to kill over 100 folks in that palace, none of us came out explicitly to condemn those acts. We looked at Omumbele in isolation as if they were not Ugandans. We forgot that the only way we are able to fight back and dislodge this dictatorship is to empower those cultural institutions. That's where the actual power is. It's not in churches. It's not in these professional associations. It's so much easier to disorganize professional associations, because professional associations are always looking at stability, and that stability is vested in personal stability, right? If someone is stable within that association, they're not going to say anything. The law society is not going to say anything when they are warning them that you will not become a judge if you try to speak against government. On the other hand, cultural institutions, because of their natural because of how they are constructed, their natural construction, they might be more efficient in fighting the dictatorship. But look at one of the most, the strongest cultural institutions, Uganda, which has tried to survive given the circumstances. That institution is being fought left, right, and center. It's not just fought by government. It's fought by regular people. It's fought by so many different parties, different categories, right? Everyone who thinks that they want to become a credible voice within the Uganda's political landscape, they have at some point to pretty much fight it in order to get to gain some elevation, political elevation. We have seen Chairman Mao do this. We have seen the Chief Justice to one extent do it and then come back and apologize. So instead of empowering these entities that can actually fight and dislodge the dictatorship, we are fighting them ourselves. In terms of food security and weaponry, of course, first of all, we cannot continue to depend on food provided or wheat provided by Russia or Ukraine, right? Uganda is a fertile land. We have a lot of land. We can grow food that can sustain ourselves for a very long time, right? There's no reason why we cannot engage in farming and introduce wheat farming in Uganda. There's a lot of empty land that can be cultivated, but we are not engaging in teaching these people. And like when people are encouraged to do farming, what they engage in, they're engaging in vanilla. You remember what happened to the vanilla project? Everyone got into the vanilla project, and then at some point they were unable to get rich from that project because the interests, the motivations surrounding that project was not to empower the people. He doesn't want the people to get empowered, because when they're empowered, when they are rich, they'll fight back. So he has to improvise them. That's the reason why there's no food. That's why the reason why we have to rely on wheat from Ukraine or Russia. Uganda wasn't always a wheat country. We didn't depend on bread or chapati to feed ourselves. We depended on root tubers, cassava, sweet potatoes, cattle for people in the West mostly. They depended on cattle, matoke, all that food that we can cultivate. Subsistence farming is no longer encouraged in Uganda. And when you look at how land is being distributed right now, this is the reason why we are relying a lot more on wheat than we used to in the past. So we need to reevaluate how we engage with our food on the ground. Why do we right now depend so much on chikomando, which is mostly chapati, right? Or why do we have to depend a lot on wheat or even rice, right? These are things we need to evaluate. We need to educate our people that for them to survive, they don't have to depend on bread alone. They can depend on matoke, and they can plant a banana plantation in the back of their house, the backyard of their house, and still be able to feed. When you look at maize, which we used a lot, like, because most of us, if we don't have matoke, at least we have kaunga. Kaunga is gotten, we get kaunga from maize, right? But how many people are engaging in cultivating maize, right? These are things we need to re-examine and be able to empower people from the ground. Because when people are not hungry, when people have food, then they are going to think about how to re-establish the political landscape in Uganda. It's easier to manipulate people who are angry, who are thinking about where am I going to get my bread today, than people who are able, who have food every day, who can get food from the garden and feed their kids and be able to send their kids back to school. In terms of weapons, now, so the weapons aspect of war right now, we need to realize that this is not just happening to Africa. It is happening everywhere. Right now, the reason why the Ukrainian war is still persisting is because the gun producers in the United States have started testing AI inspired weaponry, right? So wars are not going to end today because the people who invest in weapon making are even, like, they're gaining from having these conflicts happen. So there's going to be a lot of weapons that are not AI inspired sent to Africa, because most of these Western countries, countries from the global north, are now more focused on AI inspired weaponry. They are the ones that are being tested in Ukraine. You have seen the drones. You have seen so many other different AI inspired weaponry that is either being tested or has been tested to some extent. So the wars are going to continue, and of course, more weapons that are not as sophisticated are going to be poured into Africa, and there's going to be more coups, unfortunately, happening in the next decade because of that. Outpouring of weapons. So we should get ready for that, but we should also try to educate the populace about what is going to happen. But in order to succeed in doing our civic talks, we have to localize these civic talks, and we need to minimize our engagement in these discussions using foreign languages, because when we do engage using these foreign languages, we are only focusing on elites who hardly watch these spaces, actually, because they don't have time for it. I guess that's where I stand for now.
Right. Thank you indeed, Henry. And it brings me to a very interesting one, because I was reading somewhere, they were comparing Russian military weapons and equipment to China weaponry. And it turns out that China has the ones up to standard. Well, like the ones you're saying, AI, we are AI powered. And so I agree with you on the point of they're pouring in more military hardware, and we are going to be in trouble as a continent, and we need to be on the lookout. And brings me to you, Miriam. Somebody was actually saying that beware of Putin's money promises. Russia can no longer offer what Africa needs, and it is I think trying to sort its isolation out, because it has there's growing international isolation with itself. So I think it is trying to come together and of course demonstrate it can count on many allies and many and long-term rather loyal allies that it has had over the years. But then there's another issue that comes up: the BRICS. Miriam, there was an ICC issued an arrest warrant for Putin, and we know in August we're going to have the BRICS summit in South Africa. Let's begin from there, but I've mentioned very many things. So I expect that even from the conversation so far, you have your reactions.
Let me start with the BRICS. The BRICS is a big opportunity for Africa to break through the hegemony of Western domination and actually utilize like another avenue for development. Henry talked about how we are failing in agriculture because it seems we are not investing where it matters when it comes to food production and sustainability. Why are we have the largest chunks of fertile land? We can grow our own food, but we are so dependent on imported stuff, including the juice, the milk, everything. Even what we produce locally, we can't process, we can't even sell locally from one district to the other. And that points to the weaknesses of the infrastructure. Do we have enough infrastructure to sustain agricultural processing? Godbe is busy in his coffee farm, and he can tell you how much electricity do you need to store, process coffee or milk, or store that like fruits so that they don't rot or create or make juice, which you can even sell around or package and export. So that weakness of infrastructure, and if I can refer to what Museveni's recent speech, he was busy chastising the public officers, the civil servants, about that we have some of the best forests in the world, but we are importing furniture from the desert countries, Dubai and other Arab countries, which don't even have any tree growing. So what does that mean? Anyway, to Museveni, I would actually imagine he would be the one to be asked that question. We are the one who should be asking President Museveni that question, that why are we importing furniture? You are the president, what have you done about it? But instead he's the one again pushing the blame on us, yet he's the one who is the boss. I mean, who should be making the decisions. That aside I wanted to say that the BRICS is an opportunity for Africa, a great opportunity, and Russia is part of that. But it's not only Russia. So there is a big difference between BRICS as an institution, as a united institution, as compared to Russia, a state, a pariah state, and its relations with Africa. BRICS is South Africa, which is part of Africa, is part of the BRICS, and recently they've been expanding to include other African countries like Egypt, and I'm sure so many others would wish to join. But any alliance we enter into as Africa, we should be assertive about our interests. We should be assertive about our position into that alliance. We don't have to go in as subordinates the way we see this US-Africa relations, Russia-African relations, China-Africa relations, where we are like beggars, and the others as if they are colonizers. We need relations where we go into as equal partners, where we can state our interests and be able to defend them, where we know we are also gainfully engaged like any other player in that alliance. So the BRICS, I hope it succeeds. I really wish it succeeds, because it would be a check and balance of the Western dominated IMF and World Bank financial institutions, which have exploited Africa instead of benefiting it. And that takes...
Just to chip in, when you say the West is a check for the West, because we're moving from the West to the East, it's just that simple and very complicated as well.
Yeah, it's okay. The West here, it means the traditional Western colonial powers, the imperialists. They were colonizers. Now they are so-called development partners. But it's the and the relations we've always had with them are like subordinate and benevolent kind of financial supporter or development partner, and that relation.
Different.
Yes, the BRICS, it's different. It's we are going in as equal players, and I hope that that relationship is sustained at that level. And again, another thing the BRICS are intending to do for Africa is to try to break the dollar hegemony. You know, most African countries depend on the USA currency for foreign exchange, and that has kept us as underdeveloped us, and it's exploitative relation. So if they can bring in another competing currency which can act as an alternative, you know, the more the players, the more the bargaining power. So the BRICS is good for Africa, and I wish AU could strategize and see how they enter into that relationship. It shouldn't be, like I said earlier, it shouldn't be a subordinate donor kind of relationship, but it should be equal partners, equal player, equal interest kind of relationship. And back to the Ugandan case of agriculture. Anyway, that is somehow related. I wanted to respond to what Henry said. The reason we are where we are. I don't know what NRM government was thinking in destroying the Ministry of Agriculture. We shouldn't be begging for grains. The Ministry of Agriculture it's there in a shadow, it's like a shadow of its former self, but it was destroyed. I don't know for what reason. And right now we cannot focus on developing agriculture in Uganda. We can't we can't invest in developing bananas or developing milk or developing whatever food crop we are good at and have a comparative advantage, which would feed the people locally. We shouldn't be importing food. And again, there is the IMF World Bank conditions. They also bring in conditions that you cannot support the key sectors in the economy, which include the primary health care, agriculture, basic, other basic institutions there. So the reliance on that Western kind of relation has also been a big hindrance to that. I've lost my track of thought now. What was your other question, Lynn? You asked me something, disorganized.
No, I was looking at what the people, the analysts were saying, that we should beware of Putin's money promises, and noting that Russia can no longer offer what Africa needs.
Yes, the Putin-African relation and about the gun supply. What are we getting from that relationship? I would be more interested in African-Russia relations if, for instance, we are going to look for skills development, investment into industrial production, investment into science and technology. There is a lot.
Sorry, he did mention that he pledged cooperation, science and technology and agriculture to ensure food security for Africa.
But where are they? That's more like lip service. What we see are guns on display. What we see and what we have known traditionally, Russia supply. Actually, Putin took over the role that Libya under Gaddafi was playing. Gaddafi looked like a pro-African kind of benevolent donor, but ideally he was only supplying guns to destroy most African economies. Here and there they would develop, but Gaddafi would support the rebel group in one country and support the government. But basically, he would be just creating a market for his guns, and that's what Putin is doing. Putin is supplying guns to Africa. And what do guns do? Guns come to destroy. They never develop any country. And instead of looking for, if I were African leaders, I would be bargaining for cheaper power sources, infrastructure. We can look for technology transfer. We can look for investment in the health industry. We can look for so many other things that Russia can offer. But instead, we see the mercenaries, we see the guns, we see a few donations of grains. It's not even that they are supplying the technical know-how way which can invest, say, in researching how to process bananas or beans or whatever. No, they're just giving handouts in grains, and that's all you see. So for me, the current African relation, whatever was the past must have been good. But currently what's going on is like Russia is looking for a few allies that have remained on its side, strengthening that relationship. And secondly, it's looking to strengthen its narrowed market, because right now under sanctions they don't have so much market for their guns and weapons and whatever they supply, that they used to supply the rest of the world. And Africa looks like that dumping ground which can absorb all of that and maybe give them the much needed money to fund their conflict in Ukraine.
Right. Thank you so much, Miriam, for that. And now we have a few minutes at the top of the hour, at which we will close the conversation. But now let us, conclusively look at this interesting conversation we've been having. And because we're looking at, well, almost three things. We're looking at the coups in West Africa, but for some reason we end up, bringing it together with the Russia-Africa summit, and then we're looking at the political, atmosphere in the country here in Uganda, and then also relating it to the Russia-Africa summit. So conclusively, I'll begin with you, Godberto Mushabe. With this conversation we've had, how do we proceed? Where do we see ourselves as a country? First of all, our politics is broken, and we are now at a point where parties are being sold off or have been bought. Godber, we can't hear you in case you did not unmute.
Yes, Lynn, I think I had lost you.
Oh, I was saying that we have looked at three issues, but all of them bring us back to the Africa Summit, Russia-Africa Summit, I beg your pardon. Conclusively, where are we headed as a country, as a continent?
The future is very uncertain. I mean, people like normally expressing optimism. I'm not one of those people who always want to put a face simply because it is inconvenient to say you are not making as good progress as you should. So my view is that the future of Africa is very uncertain. The future of Uganda is uncertain. The future of Uganda is uncertain in the sense that there are no mechanisms for managing political transition right now from President Museveni to another leader. There is absolute uncertainty, and the posturing and the brinkmanship is almost taking over the entire policy discussion in the country. So you have a country that spends much more time discussing not policy, but really discussing Museveni and his son, and that's unfortunate for any country to have. But to get the initiative back, we have to be able to think of how do we organize ourselves as citizens and invest in those things by those that matter to us. Invest in education. I think one of the areas where we have had a major crisis is in the education sector. For most of our listeners and viewers, they need to understand that the data that I have now, because I have been compiling data on completion of primary 7, the data that I have shows that between 1997, when universal primary education was introduced, and 2014, that's the data that I have so far compiled, there are at least 19 million children that did not reach primary 7. Now, as a country, you really have to think that as a crisis, unless we are dumb, where are all these young people? And so you go in the villages, you see them in emerging urban centers. You go to towns, you see them in all these slums, and it is going to be a crisis for the country that we have to deal with. We have to be able to invest in health, the healthcare infrastructure. In as much as the government has tried to build all these health centers, all of you guys have you realize that whenever there is a very improved peasant in Uganda, whom they call VIPs, whenever they fall sick, everybody has to be thrown out of the country to the US, to South Africa, to India, to Turkey. But how is it possible that a country that has been independent for 62 years, for 60 years now, those are 6 decades, that you don't have health facilities that can provide top of the range health care for your VIPs, and then the citizens can also benefit from that. We've talked about the investment in agriculture. I have argued time and again that our economic transformation can only be based on agro-industrialization, because that's where we really have a niche in terms of citizen engagement. So as long as we are being drawn discussing the politics of Museveni and his son, and we're not dealing with the strategic economic policy issues, and we're not building citizenship, we are not building a system of the rule of law where everybody is equal before the law and can get equal protection from the law, then you have absolute uncertainty as a country. As a continent, we are really at a really critical junction. I mean, Miriam talks about BRICS being an opportunity. I don't believe in all this talk. BRICS an opportunity. BRICS has been here for now over 10 years. How come it has been in limbo and it is now almost becoming the big thing being talked about? Every time we have had new developments, some of you guys remember NEPAD, the New Economic Partnership for Africa, which started around 2000 with Mbeki and Obasanjo and others. How did it disappear? It disappears, and then you have the Africa Preferential Free Trade Area. Everybody talks about Africa Preferential Trade Area. Now Africa is going to fly. We must have a problem as Africans that we keep on celebrating these things, but in substantive terms, you are not seeing it. So I move out of Uganda. You go to Kenya, you have to get your passport stamped. You go to Tanzania, then we say we have the East African Community. For you to get a visa to South Africa, it's a nightmare. And then you say, oh, Africa is integrating. I actually think that we have African presidents that talk too much. They adopt all kinds of instruments. If you go on the websites of these Africa regional groupings, the African Union, the East African Community, because the number of documents we have adopted by these African rulers, which they don't even respect, is something that has to worry you. Because at what point do we as Africans make decisions and be able to pursue them relentlessly and without giving in? And I think that's where we need to be focused. So unless we are able to have leaders on the continent that understand that the strength of the continent is only commensurate to the strength of the continent's people, that Uganda is only as strong as Ugandans can be. And we keep on celebrating these strong men and gunmen who are capturing power and almost keeping every citizen as a prisoner. I can tell you, we can celebrate, we can rejoice as many milestones as we can. We will be here because remember, let me end with this point, that the guys like Obianga Nguema, and I think even Paul Biya, they were there when the Lagos Plan of Action was adopted. That's 1980. They were presidents. Since then, so many things have been adopted, NEPAD and others. I mean, if you have a meeting in Addis of the African Union, you have Obianga Nguema, you have Paul Biya, you have Museveni, you have now the guys that have gone like Bashir and others who have been there. you go in an AU meeting. What is it that is new that you are discussing, that when you get out of Addis, you are able to transform these countries? So we need to be able to, I think we need to find a way how we can be able to challenge ourselves as a people on the continent and stop worshipping these rulers, because there is too much worshipping. In Africa, there is too much worshipping of rulers. There is a very big problem in terms of power asymmetry. Rulers and presidents are seen like kings, and citizens look like subjects instead of citizens. Until we change that structure of power, we are going to remain in a ping pong, and we'll be making progress like a sewing machine, where you can be able to move it in a lot of speed, but it will be in the same place. You'll have some, if you are looking for progress, you can find all kinds of stories to tell. But in terms of transformation, you haven't really achieved the transformation that you would achieve within the timelines that we are looking at. And that is where, for me, I see the challenge. And it is not easy. I'm not saying it is easy, but I think it is us, the people, who will have to redirect our energies in terms of what we are able to do, rather than looking at these rulers and their regimes that have become overly corrupt. A group of people that have taken over power and that have captured the power in a coup. Those ones are more or less like prison, like they are prison warders, because everybody in the country, they more or less like own the country, because we have guns, we are trained militarily, we can shoot you, we can determine when to kill you, we can determine the nature of justice you can get. So that is the kind of continent that we are now projecting into the future. And I see some people celebrating some of these things and say, this is the end of colonialism. An African who is a colonizer is no different from a Mzungu who is a colonizer. They are all the same as far as I'm concerned, because freedom is what matters to you as a person, whether in whichever country you are. So we can repress white colonialists or Western imperialists. We repress them with Eastern imperialists, or we even repress them with African imperialists. That will not change our situation until we are able to liberate ourselves and secure our freedom. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Godber, for that. Miriam, I hope you took note, because this was going to you. Francis, conclusively, we're running out of time.
Oh, thank you, Lynn, and fellow panelists, for an enriching conversation. What I will have to say is that as Ugandans, East Africans, and Africa in general, is for us to constantly acknowledge and teach ourselves what is our role as citizens, as East Africans, as Africans. The moment we realize that, no one is going to come and colonize us, both locally and internationally. Number two, I would like to say that it is important for us, because we have a leadership crisis in Africa, and I would say world over. But it is also important to us rethink our leadership at an individual level, at a community level, and then feeding into the national or regional levels. And we bind by those principles that we need to do. Then number three, I would say that in all that we are doing to transform our economies, we have been singing value addition, but this should come with money being invested in universities or research institutions to come up with how can even this latest item that we have to be transformed. And any other engagement should always come with technology transfer. If for me, I was to engage with these other countries, if you are saying you want our coffee, I would prefer you bring a machine and collaborate with Godber, should become a shareholder in whatever industry you're coming to establish, because as you leave, at least Godber would have known how the whole business of processing coffee is concerned, and then that's how we can sustain that. Then number four, I would say as a country, as Africans, we need to rethink our approach in terms of institutions in our countries and the structure of governance and institution. That's why we have the education sector, the health sector, name it, collapsing. We have to rethink that, and of course it comes with able leadership. And then when it comes to foreign engagement and partnerships, I still believe that we should always be going there as equal partners and serving interests, either if not of our individual countries, then they should be individuals of a region or a bloc, whether it is East Africa or Africa. But that comes with after knowing what are our interests as at an individual country or as a people. Otherwise, if we continue going to these summits as how they are going there, to me, it is just a huge sounding nothing. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, Francis, and to quote what the president said in relation to what you've just said, he said Europe must stop buying raw materials from Africa. And he's saying, come, let's work instead of you coming and shipping our raw materials when you could set up and we do even better things. Okay, Henry, conclusively.
First of all, this has been a very interesting conversation, one that I have learned a lot of things from fellow panelists, and I want to thank you for all your submissions. I think for me, people need to understand that most of these summits that are happening all over the world, they're just political theater. There's nothing tangible that is going to come out of these summits to help build citizenry in Africa. And citizenry in Africa, citizenship in Africa, in my opinion, is a myth. It is a myth because we all have seen the transition from colonial powers to local colonizers, presidents that are governing for over 40 years, all who are self-interested, people who were revolutionary, were killed off, the Lumumbas, the Sankaras, people of the like. These are all people that really thought about building citizenship within the respective countries. Also, we need to think about how we can elevate our indigenous languages, because without indigenous languages, we can't really build citizenship within these countries where we live. So if you're thinking about building African citizenships, we need to think about how we think about how we are going to structure that kind of phenomenon, how we are going to empower our people, because we cannot call people citizens when they have no languages, right? We are more engaged with foreign languages. We think that people who speak English well, or French well, or German well are superior than people who speak indigenous languages. And we cannot think about, we cannot continue to pose, we cannot continue to pose questions of democracy or citizenry when we ourselves are not self-examining to ensure that what we are really fighting for is what is going to help the people on the ground, our family members, our grandparents, our children. Because right now in Africa is suffering from language poverty. World Vision, World Bank has written a lot about this. They have invested a lot about the concept of language poverty, where children right now, within the first 7 years, cannot engage with their indigenous languages. They are struggling to speak English, but they cannot really think well in English because English is not their indigenous language. There's a lot to read about language poverty, and I think Comrade Godba will look into that because he's interested in researching about education, which I agree with, that we should invest a lot in education, but we should also evaluate the kind of education that we want to invest in. What kind of education are we investing in, and whose interests does it elevate? We also need to ensure that people who are in our parliaments or legislative assemblies talk about issues that are important to the citizens of our countries. In the past couple of months, there's a lot that has been said about. I think the most popular bill has been the homosexuality bill. No one is talking about the healthcare bill, where people are going to be imposed with paying healthcare for everyone in their family, whether they can afford it or not. Haven't evaluated whether that policy or that bill is going to be a good policy for Ugandans or not. So we need to ensure that we keep our MPs accountable to talk about things that actually matter, things that actually affect us as a people, as Ugandans, as citizens of that country, and ensure that we talk about things that give us value as a people.
Sure. Thank you so much, Henry. It was an absolutely amazing having you. Miriam, as we wind up and as we conclude finally on this conversation.
Briefly, I want to concur with what Godber and Henry has said, and also what Henry said, that this was an engaging discussion. And I thank you all the panelists, and we cannot emphasize that last point, Henry, about using our indigenous languages and promoting our own knowledge bases, our own knowledge. Today someone was sharing briefly like how Seven said millet is the most nutritious food out there. It's not the most in the world, but it's one of the best nutritious foods that we have. But why are we not developing it? Why can't we develop that and export it? It would fetch us even much more money than the oil that is now being labeled the bad fuel. So I think we still have a lot to do as Africans into building our countries, our continent, into empowering ourselves even before we engage with the rest of the world. As Godba said, every other relation will be exploitative because we are not ready. You cannot go to bargain with an empty head, empty basket. You don't even know what you want. What will you get out of there? You will just be exploited because you don't even know what you should put on the table, what you should demand from the rest. I want to thank all of you, and Lynn, thank you for the great moderation, and nice weekend. See some the last one. Bye.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you, God bless you, sir, for making time. We stole you from your coffee.
Lynn,
yes, please.
Lynn,
yes, please.
You, Henry, and Francis, you need to join the Fortune 500 club. And Miriam should be the one to make sure that you join.
Absolutely.
I will. We want to empower ourselves.
The dashboard because you are missing something very important.
Okay, we'll join in. Certainly, we'll join
and you teach us how to grow coffee.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Okay, guys.
We have opened the market for you in the Balkans. So surely, what could go wrong?
Yes.
All right, a pleasure.
Wonderful weekend, guys.